the Noble Lord the Minister to accept this amendment.
My Lord, pleasure to follow the Noble Lord, Lord Wigley, and to agree with him whilst taking us back to the issues that have mostly been covered in this group. There is actually 6 amendments to which I've attached my name, and the committee, I'm sure, will be relieved to know that I'm not going to speak to all of them. Indeed, I'm chiefly going to speak to Amendment 61, which is in the name of the Noble Lord, Lord Lansley, to which I attach my name. It has, of course, been introduced very kindly by the Noble Lady Baroness Noakes, but not backed by the Noble Lady Baroness Noakes. So I'm now going to attempt to present the argument in favour of this amendment at this point. And I would also stress that the intellectual work in this very much has been done by the Noble Lord, Lord Lansley, but when I saw the amendment, I thought it was something that was so important that it did need to be picked up. The purpose of this amendment is linked to the description of the National Procurement Policy Statement in Clause 12, that it is, quote, setting out the government's strategic priorities in relation to procurement, close quote. Now, wrestling with all of the government amendments and the complexity of this bill for the small Green Group has been challenging, but as I understand it, there are no government amendments to change procurement in 12.1 to, quote the technical term, covered procurement, so that it is the government's intention that their strategic priorities should apply to all public procurement, including below-threshold procurement, as well as light-touch procurement, international agreement procurement, defence and security contracts. Now, Noble Lords will note, and this is what we've been talking about a lot in this group, that the first part of this clause is the achievement of targets set out under the Climate Change Act 2008 and the Environment Act 2021. Now, there is clearly, I would posit, very good reasons to put statutory obligations such as these in the list of strategic priorities. If they're not included, they are effectively deprioritised. And that would be potentially damaging to the achievement of targets that have been mandated by Parliament, indeed with very strong cross-party support, picking up the points made by the Noble Lord, Lord Wallace, of these are things which have been agreed but actually need to be delivered on. And making that point about delivery, I think I have to make reference to the report 2 weeks ago by the Committee on Climate Change, which very much, in I think what you would have to say the strongest of language, spoke about, quote, major policy failures and, quote, scant evidence of delivery. And it is this, through this procurement, that we're going to have to see this urgent delivery. Now, I would argue the Noble Lady Baroness Noakes, in introducing this group, talked about, potentially suggested this was a list of pet clauses. Well, I would suggest that certainly the first element here being the climate targets and the Environment Act are clearly not pet clauses. I think we've covered Clause B here about the Social Value Act 2012 at length, so I won't go back to that territory. I will admit, actually, that C here, innovation and competitiveness, is not perhaps the wording that I would have chosen and perhaps might fit with that category. But I think there is an important fourth point here with D, with the minimisation of fraud, corruption, waste and the abuse of public money. And I think, noting the very broad, if not completely broad, support in this clause from the Noble Lord, Lord Lansley and myself, I'm going to perhaps draw in some more political breadth here that I doubt will see the Noble Lord, Lord Agnew participating in this committee, but I think it would be entirely appropriate to refer to his resignation speech as a very powerful argument for the need for Clause D in this amendment. And I would also wish to make the point that Amendment 61 does not prevent ministers adding their own priorities to this list. So I've done my best to really present the argument for that clause. I do just have to briefly, and I'm delighted to see how many members of the committee have expressed support for the Noble Lady Baroness Boycott's Amendment 66 on food. Having signed it, I do just really want to stress how far we've seen movement in this area, which I'm very aware of because I believe the first written questions I asked in your Lordship's House were about procurement of local and healthy and organic food for schools, hospitals and prisons. And the answer I got back was, we don't know, was the answer to all of those three. And yet we have now seen through the government's food strategy an acknowledgement, I would say it's inadequate, but an acknowledgement that public procurement has to address these issues. And we often like to hear, the government often likes to talk about being world leading. I would point out that these targets, which as the Noble Lady Baroness Boycott set out, have been carefully established through very careful consideration and the development of the National Food Strategy. They're still extraordinarily modest by international standards.
Yes.
There are many, particularly cities that I know about, where these targets are getting very close to 100% in terms of food in schools, food in hospitals, food in prison, with very demonstrable positive effects. So, I would agree with the Noble Lady Baroness Boycott, and indeed the comments in this committee have supported that this is an uncontroversial amendment which the government could surely accept.
Mm.